Imagine being judged unfairly just because of how you look, without the person making those assumptions knowing who you really are or the influence you wield. Today's story recounts a shocking incident at an airport that begins with humiliation but ends in a way no one could have predicted. Stick around until the end because the twist is absolutely jaw-dropping. And before we dive in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Let's jump in. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the quiet buzz of travelers' conversations as Maya Reed entered the bustling terminal of Westvale International Airport. Sunlight streamed through towering glass windows, lighting her path to the check-in counter. Maya had been awake since early morning, double-checking every detail of her trip. Her tailored black blazer and pressed ivory blouse gave her an air of professionalism, while her comfortable loafers spoke to her practicality. She carried a sleek travel bag in one hand, her phone in the other, verifying her travel itinerary. Everything was in order. Flight 453, first-class ticket, departure in 2 hours. Maya allowed herself a small smile. She had flown many times before, but this was her first time treating herself to a first-class seat. It was a reward for the countless hours she had dedicated to growing her community outreach foundation, which had finally started gaining traction. As she approached the priority check-in counter, the line was surprisingly short. A polished sign reading First Class and Priority Boarding stood near the counter, where a man in his mid-40s stood. His name tag read Eric, and his arms were folded as his eyes darted over the waiting passengers with impatience. His slicked-back hair glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights. When it was Maya's turn, she stepped forward, her voice warm and polite. "Good morning," she said, sliding her ticket and ID across the counter. "I have a first-class ticket for Flight 453. Eric picked up her documents with the careful disdain of someone handling something unpleasant. His eyes scanned the ticket, then slowly lifted to meet hers. There was a flicker of something in his gaze. Judgment, disbelief. His lips twisted into a faint sneer. "First class?" he asked, his tone thick with skepticism. "Yes," Maya replied, her smile faltering slightly under his scrutiny. She felt the weight of his stare, as if he were dissecting her presence at the counter. Eric began tapping at the keyboard, his expression hardening. After a moment, he looked at the ticket again and then back at Maya. "There seems to be an issue," he said, his voice colder now. "This ticket isn't valid for first class." Maya blinked, confusion creasing her brow. "That's not possible," she said, keeping her tone measured. "I purchased this ticket weeks ago. It's fully confirmed." Eric's smirk widened. "Well, it doesn't appear valid now," he said, holding the ticket up slightly as though to emphasize its supposed flaws. "Could you check again, please?" Maya asked, her voice calm but laced with growing irritation. Eric let out a loud, exaggerated sigh and began tapping on the keyboard again, his fingers hitting the keys harder than necessary. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "First class is for priority passengers." "I'm well aware," Maya replied evenly, though her patience was thinning. "I bought a first-class ticket, and I'm confident there's been a mistake on your end." Eric leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping as though sharing a conspiratorial secret. "Look, ma'am, we've had situations with people trying to, how do I put this, upgrade themselves. If you can't afford first class, the economy check-in is down the hall." The words hit Maya like a slap. She froze, her heart pounding as embarrassment and anger clashed within her. Around her, she felt the stares of other passengers, some curious, others judgmental. The prickling unease she'd felt earlier had transformed into a full-blown discomfort. "You're mistaken," Maya said, her voice sharper now. "I paid for this ticket, and I have the confirmation email to prove it." Eric straightened, his smirk fading into an exaggerated look of exasperation. "Security," he called over his shoulder, waving toward a nearby guard. "What are you doing?" Maya demanded, her voice rising in disbelief. The security guard, a tall man with a stern expression, approached. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, his gaze shifting between Maya and Eric. Eric gestured toward Maya dismissively. "This passenger is being disruptive and refusing to move to the correct line." "That's not true," Maya shot back, her frustration boiling over. "I've done nothing wrong. I just want to board the flight I paid for." The guard frowned, looking at Eric. What's the issue with her ticket? Eric shrugged, his smug expression firmly in place. It's invalid. Probably bought it from a discount site. You know how these things go. Maya clenched her fists, anger coursing through her. That's a lie, she said firmly. I bought this ticket directly from the airline. Check it again. The guard hesitated, but Eric waved him off. No need. We can't hold up the line for someone trying to scam their way into first class. Humiliation wrapped around Maya like a suffocating cloak. She glanced around, catching the curious gazes of strangers watching her every move. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. You'll regret this, she said quietly, her voice steady with determination. Eric chuckled, his laugh dismissive. We'll see about that. Maya turned away, her heart pounding with indignation. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with purpose. As she stepped aside, she dialed a number she hadn't used in some time. I need a favor, she said, her voice calm but resolute. Can you send the jet? She hung up, lifting her chin as she walked away from the counter. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The murmurs and pointed stares from other passengers surrounded Renee Carter as she took a steadying breath. Despite the humiliation clawing at her, she refused to let her composure slip. You'll regret this, she said quietly, her voice firm with an undertone of resolve. Behind the counter, Eric, the gate agent, chuckled dismissively. We'll see about that, he replied with a smirk. Turning on her heel, Renee pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly, dialing a number she hadn't used in some time. Her calm demeanor remained intact, though the sting of indignity still burned. I need a favor, Renee said into the phone, her voice steady but carrying a sharp edge. Can you send the jet? Without waiting for further questions, she ended the call. Straightening her posture, she strode away from the counter, her head held high. She didn't glance back, though she could feel the weight of Eric's mocking gaze following her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Renee found a seat by the large glass windows overlooking the tarmac. The terminal's chaos, the chatter of travelers, the rolling of luggage, seemed to fade into the background. She clenched her phone tightly, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from the controlled fire of anger simmering inside her. This wasn't just about the insults she had endured. It was about the principle, the unshakable disrespect she faced simply because of her appearance. Renee had dealt with prejudice before, but something about this moment hit a breaking point. This time, she wouldn't let it slide. Her phone buzzed, and she answered swiftly. Miss Carter, came a familiar, warm voice. Is everything all right? It's not, Renee replied curtly. I need the jet, now. There was a pause, followed by the sharp intake of breath, as the man on the other end realized the gravity of her request. Where are you? She rattled off her location, her voice clipped but polite. It'll be there in 10 minutes, he assured her. Do you need anything else? No, just the jet. Thank you, Renee said, her tone softening slightly. She ended the call and leaned back in the hard plastic chair. Her pulse began to slow as the steady rhythm of planes taking off and landing provided an unexpected calm. Still, the storm inside her hadn't settled. Behind the check-in counter, Eric smirked smugly as he processed the next passenger's ticket. He cast a quick glance at Renee, seated alone by the windows. In his mind, he had dealt with someone who didn't belong in first class. She was just another person trying to punch above her weight, and he had done his job, preserving the exclusivity of first class. His attention returned to the line as an impatient passenger cleared their throat. Right, Eric muttered, refocusing on his task. Meanwhile, Renee's attention was drawn to the tarmac by the unmistakable sound of jet engines. Her heart raced as she spotted a sleek private jet descending gracefully, its polished surface gleaming in the afternoon sun. Its arrival was a sharp contrast to the hustle and chaos of the crowded commercial terminal. Passengers around her began to notice as well. Whispers rippled through the terminal and people craned their necks to catch a better view. Some speculated about the VIP who might be aboard the luxurious jet, while others simply gawked. Renee, however, remained still, her eyes fixed on the plane as it taxied closer to the private gate. A dark SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the glass doors of the terminal. A chauffeur stepped out, his movements precise and purposeful as he scanned the area. Within moments, he was heading directly toward Renee. Miss Carter, he said, his voice low and respectful. Your jet is ready. Renee rose to her feet with deliberate grace. The weight of countless curious stares pressed on her as the room seemed to quiet, curiosity overtaking the usual hum of conversation. She adjusted her blazer, lifted her chin, and nodded. Thank you. The chauffeur escorted her to the private gate, his imposing presence enough to part the crowd. Renee walked with poise, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She didn't glance back at the first-class counter, but she could feel Eric's gaze on her, heavy with disbelief. Outside, the sleek black SUV waited with its engine idling. The chauffeur opened the door and Renee slid inside, her expression calm yet resolute. As the car drove across the tarmac toward the waiting jet, Renee allowed herself a small smile. This wasn't about showing off. It was about reclaiming her dignity, about making it clear that she wouldn't allow herself to be dismissed so easily. When the car came to a stop, the jet staircase was already lowered. A crew of professionals stood at the top, welcoming her with warm smiles and impeccable courtesy. Renee stepped out of the SUV, the cool breeze brushing against her face as she approached the stairs. Before boarding, she paused and glanced back at the terminal. From her vantage point, she could see the commotion her departure had caused. A crowd of passengers had gathered at the windows, their faces pressed against the glass. Somewhere in that crowd stood Eric. Renee didn't wave. She didn't acknowledge them. She simply ascended the steps and stepped into the jet, the door closing behind her with a soft finality. Renee stepped into the jet, the door closing behind her with a quiet finality. The interior was a haven of elegance. Soft cream leather seats, polished mahogany accents, and warm ambient lighting. She sank into one of the plush chairs, letting out a deep exhale as the tension of the past hour began to ease. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. "Miss Carter, we'll be departing shortly." The low rumble of the engines soon followed, a soothing rhythm that began to drown out the frustration lingering in her mind. Renee reached for her phone and opened her email. She started typing a detailed message addressed to the executive team of Horizon Skyways, recounting every degrading moment she had endured at the hands of their gate agent. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, each word deliberate and precise. Before hitting send, she paused, her thoughts briefly lingering on Eric. She didn't seek revenge. What she wanted was accountability and respect. Satisfied with her message, she sent it and placed her phone aside. As the jet ascended, the city below shrank into a quilt of green fields and winding roads. For the first time that day, Renee felt a small measure of peace. While the fight wasn't over, reclaiming her dignity felt like a victory she could savor. The gentle hum of the jet engines became a comforting backdrop as Renee gazed out of the window, her mind replaying the events at the terminal with sharp clarity. The way Eric had dismissed her so easily, the patronizing tone and the humiliation. It all replayed in her head. She wasn't fragile, but this time was different. She wasn't going to let it slide. A flight attendant approached with a tray of refreshments. Renee accepted a small cup of chamomile tea, the fragrant aroma filling the cabin. Wrapping her hands around the warm cup, she let its soothing heat seep into her palms. It was a stark contrast to the cold hostility she had faced earlier. As she leaned back into the seat, her phone vibrated softly on the armrest. The notification was a reply to her earlier email. She opened it and scanned the response carefully. The email was from the airline's executive liaison, an assistant to the CEO. Subject: Urgent incident at gate check-in. Dear Miss Carter, we are deeply sorry to learn about your experience. This behavior does not align with the values or policies of Horizon Skyways. Please be assured that we take such matters very seriously. The CEO, Mr. Daniel Harris, would like to personally speak with you at your earliest convenience. Kindly let us know a time that works for you. Sincerely, Angela Morris, Executive Liaison. Horizon Skyways. Renee set her lips into a thin line as she read. The response was professional, but she could sense the urgency behind its carefully measured tone. The airline knew the weight of her complaint and the potential fallout if the story gained traction. She considered her response before beginning to type. Back at the terminal, Eric leaned casually against the counter, scrolling through his phone. The line had thinned, leaving him with little to do but bask in his imagined authority. He glanced toward the large windows, where clusters of passengers stood, whispering and pointing. Frowning, Eric set his phone down and craned his neck to see what was causing the commotion. Through the glass, he spotted the sleek private jet taxiing gracefully along the runway. Its polished exterior gleamed in the sunlight, exuding an aura of unmistakable luxury. Eric's stomach twisted as an uneasy realization crept in. Could this have anything to do with the woman he had dismissed earlier? He brushed the thought aside. Surely it was just a coincidence. "What's going on out there?" a passenger asked, pointing toward the jet. "Nothing to do with me," Eric muttered defensively, his voice tinged with irritation. He busied himself with the computer, but his mind was racing. On board the jet, Renee finished typing her response to the airline's executive team. She agreed to speak with the CEO, but requested that the conversation wait until after she reached her destination. She wasn't about to let the incident derail her plans. The flight attendant returned with a tray of finger sandwiches. Renee thanked her and settled back into her seat. She scrolled through her messages, reading notes of encouragement from friends and colleagues. Most were unaware of the day's events, but their positivity was a welcome balm. Her phone vibrated again, a call from an unknown number. After a moment's hesitation, Renee answered. "Hello, this is Renee Carter." "Miss Carter, this is Daniel Harris, CEO of Horizon Skyways," the voice on the other end said. "I wanted to personally extend my deepest apologies for what happened today." Renee arched an eyebrow, surprised by the directness of the call. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I appreciate you taking the time to reach out." "Of course," Harris replied. His tone was earnest. "We've been made aware of the situation, and let me assure you, this does not reflect the values of our airline, especially not in first class." Renee allowed a small pause before responding. "I understand that mistakes can happen, Mr. Harris, but this didn't feel like a mistake. It felt deliberate." There was a moment of silence, heavy but not uncomfortable. When Harris spoke again, his voice carried a tone of resolve. "You're absolutely right, Miss Carter. We're already reviewing the incident and will take immediate action to ensure it never happens again. May I ask, what would you suggest we do to improve?" Renee leaned back, considering her response. "Accountability is a start," she said firmly. "Training is important, but so is transparency. Customers need to know you take these issues seriously, and there need to be consequences when standards aren't upheld." "You have my word, Miss Carter. We'll be in touch with updates as we move forward," Harris said. Ending the call, Renee set her phone aside and let out a deep breath. She felt a small sense of satisfaction. While the fight for justice was far from over, this was a step in the right direction. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I appreciate you taking the time to address this," Renee said firmly, though her tone remained composed. "Of course," Daniel Harris replied, his voice steady and earnest. "I've been fully briefed on the incident, and I want to assure you, this is not the kind of experience we want any of our passengers to have, especially not in first class." Renee let a brief pause hang in the air before responding. "I understand that mistakes can happen, Mr. Harris, but this didn't feel like a mistake. It felt deliberate." The silence on the other end was heavy, but not uncomfortable. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice carried a clear note of determination. "You're absolutely right, Miss Carter. The employee in question will be placed under review immediately, and will implement additional training across all customer service teams to prevent this from happening again." Renee nodded to herself, somewhat satisfied but still guarded. "That's a start," she replied, her tone measured. "But I'm not just looking for an apology. I need to see tangible, systemic changes in how your company handles situations like this moving forward." "You have my word," Daniel assured her. "We'll be in touch with updates on the steps we're taking." Ending the call, Renee leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of cautious optimism. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly heard. While there was still much to be done, this was progress. As the jet began its descent, Renee gazed out of the window. The clouds parted to reveal a vibrant cityscape, its lights shimmering against the fading hues of the evening sky. The anger that had clung to her all day had started to dissolve, replaced by a quiet resolve. This journey wasn't over, not for her, not for Horizon Skyways, and certainly not for Eric. But for now, she allowed herself to savor this small victory. She sipped the last of her tea, the warmth grounding her as the plane touched down with practiced grace. The private terminal came into view, a sprawling space lit with golden hues. The jet slowed to a smooth stop, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Miss Carter, we've arrived. A car is waiting to take you to your destination." Renee glanced out the window to see a sleek black town car waiting just beyond the tarmac. Its chauffeur stood poised by the door, the very image of professionalism. She exhaled slowly, smoothing her blazer as she rose from her seat. Descending the jet's staircase, the cool evening air brushed her face, offering a refreshing contrast to the day's earlier chaos. She stepped into the waiting car, the faint hum of the engine the only sound in the quiet night. As the car drove through the city, Renee rested her head against the window, watching the neon glow of restaurants and the shimmer of rain-slicked streets pass by. It felt surreal after the turmoil of the morning. Her phone buzzed intermittently on her lap, with messages from friends and colleagues reacting to the day's events. One text, from her close friend Camille, caught her eye. "Are you okay? I heard what happened. I'm furious for you. Let me know if you need anything." Renee's fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed a brief response. "I'm okay. Thanks for checking in. I'll call you later." She appreciated the outpouring of support, but wasn't ready for long conversations just yet. She needed time to process everything on her own. The car pulled up to a boutique hotel nestled in a quiet corner of the city. Renee had chosen it for its understated elegance, a refuge from the bustling downtown. The doorman greeted her with a warm smile, opening the car door with a slight bow. "Welcome, Miss Carter. We've been expecting you." "Thank you," Renee replied, her voice steady but tinged with wariness. The hotel lobby was serene, bathed in soft lighting with a faint aroma of lavender lingering in the air. The staff handled her check-ins swiftly and discreetly, and within minutes, she was stepping into her suite. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. She let out a deep breath, setting her bag on the armchair by the window. Slipping off her shoes, she let her bare feet sink into the plush carpet. The room was a sanctuary of calm, with a cozy sitting area, a bed dressed in crisp white linens, and a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Renee poured herself a glass of water from the carafe on the table and sat by the window, gazing out at the twinkling lights. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to truly breathe. The knot of tension in her chest began to loosen as she took in the quiet beauty of the city below. Renee's brief sense of calm was interrupted by the buzz of her phone. This time, it was an email notification. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up, her curiosity outweighing her fatigue. The email was from Angela Morris, the executive liaison who had responded earlier to her initial complaint. Renee opened it and began to read. Subject: update on today's incident. Dear Miss Carter, I wanted to provide you with an update on the situation you brought to our attention. The employee involved has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Additionally, we are initiating a comprehensive review of our customer service protocols and implementing sensitivity training for all frontline staff. Our CEO has also instructed us to expedite the resolution of this matter to ensure such incidents are prevented in the future. We remain committed to keeping you updated as we move forward. Sincerely, Angela Morris, Executive Liaison, Horizon Skyways. Renee placed her phone down, her emotions a mix of cautious optimism and skepticism. It was a start, but she knew all too well how corporate responses often carried the risk of being performative. Would this lead to meaningful change, or would the promises fade once the immediate attention subsided? She leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the glittering skyline beyond the window. The day's events replayed in her mind, the dismissive smirk, the condescending tone, the public humiliation. It wasn't just about her, she realized. It was about the countless others who had faced similar treatment but lacked the resources or platform to fight back. Renee knew she had a responsibility to ensure the accountability promised to her set a precedent. As the hours stretched into the night, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Irene Walker, her mentor and a retired civil rights lawyer who had been a guiding force in Renee's career. Renee, Irene's warm but firm voice came through the line. "I heard what happened. How are you holding up?" Renee let out a sigh, feeling some of the tension in her shoulders ease at the familiar tone. I'm okay, Irene. Tired, but okay. I'm proud of you for standing your ground, Irene said. But remember, this is bigger than you. What's your plan? Renee hesitated. I'm not sure yet. They've reached out, promised changes, but you know how these things go. Irene chuckled softly. Oh, I know. Promises are easy. Follow through is harder. But you've got something powerful on your side. Their fear of consequences. Use it. A faint smile crossed Renee's lips. You always know what to say. I know you, Irene replied. You're not the type to let this slide. Call me if you need help, and don't forget you're not alone in this. As the call ended, Renee felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for fairness and respect for everyone who deserved better. She rose from her seat, preparing for bed. Slipping under the soft covers, her mind began to quiet. She didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was certain: this wasn't the end of the story. Tomorrow, she would begin the next chapter. And this time, she would ensure the world was paying attention. Morning arrived softly, sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains of Renee's suite. The faint sounds of the city waking up, car horns, distant chatter, the rumble of delivery trucks crept into the peaceful space. Renee stirred, reluctant to leave the comfort of the plush bed. The weight of the previous day lingered like a persistent shadow. She sat up, her bare feet brushing the cool carpet, and stretched, trying to shake off the lingering exhaustion. Despite the luxury surrounding her, sleep had been elusive. Her mind had replayed every word, every look, and every injustice she had faced at the airport. But today was a new day, and Renee intended to meet it with clarity and resolve. Downstairs in the hotel's dining room, the air was filled with the enticing aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. Renee selected a small table by the window where the soft morning light made the polished silverware gleam. She ordered a simple breakfast of an omelet, fresh fruit, and toast, savoring the momentary peace as she sipped her coffee. Her phone rested on the table, its screen dark. Renee resisted the urge to check her emails or messages immediately. For now, she needed this quiet moment to center herself before diving back into the whirlwind. As she gazed out at the city, watching people hurry along the sidewalks, her thoughts drifted to Irene's words from the night before. This is bigger than you. Irene was right. What happened to Renee wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern, one that countless others faced daily. Renee's platform gave her both an opportunity and a responsibility to challenge that pattern and demand better. Her breakfast arrived, and she thanked the server with a polite nod. Taking a bite of her omelet, she let the familiar flavors ground her. It was a small reminder that while the road ahead would be demanding, she was ready to face it. As Renee ate, she began mentally outlining her next steps. This wasn't just about seeking a resolution as a customer. It was about advocating for meaningful, systemic change. Back in her suite, Renee settled into the desk chair and opened her laptop. The email from Angela Morris still sat in her inbox, waiting for a reply. Renee read through it again, her eyes lingering on the phrase, sensitivity training. It sounded promising on the surface, but too often these measures were little more than performative gestures, boxes checked without genuine efforts to foster understanding or respect. She began typing her response, her words measured but firm, balancing appreciation for the airline's swift acknowledgement with a clear insistence on tangible action. Subject: re-update on today's incident. Dear Ms. Morris, thank you for the update and for your prompt attention to this matter. While I appreciate the steps being taken, I would like to discuss how we can ensure these changes are both lasting and impactful. Sensitivity training is a good start, but I believe a broader approach is needed to address systemic issues within your organization. I'd be happy to share further thoughts on this during our upcoming call. Please let me know a time that works best. Sincerely, Renee Carter. She read the email twice before hitting send. Her fingers lingered on the keyboard for a moment as her mind raced ahead to the conversation that would follow. Later that afternoon, Renee received a message from her colleague Simone with a link to an article on a major news site. The accompanying text read, "Looks like the story is getting out." Renee clicked the link, her heart tightening as she read. The article described her experience at the airport, recounting the incident with the gate agent and the dramatic arrival of her private jet. Though her name wasn't mentioned, the details were unmistakable. The headline read, "Luxury Jet Arrival Spotlights Alleged Racial Discrimination at Major Airline." Renee's chest tightened as she finished reading the piece. The article itself was factual and restrained, but the comment section told a different story. Supportive messages were mixed with vitriolic remarks, with strangers debating whether her experience constituted discrimination or if she was simply playing the victim. She set her phone down, her hands trembling slightly. Renee wasn't naive. She had expected some backlash, but seeing the polarized reactions in real time was unnerving. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of Irene's words from the previous night. "You're not alone in this." By late afternoon, Renee was preparing for her scheduled call with Daniel Harris. She had jotted down key points she wanted to address, ensuring her thoughts were organized. As the time approached, she felt a mix of resolve and apprehension. This call wasn't just about her experience, it was about ensuring the airline understood the broader implications of what had happened. The call began promptly, with Daniel's voice warm and apologetic. "Miss Carter, thank you for taking the time to speak with me again. I want to reiterate how deeply sorry I am for what you endured." "I appreciate that, Mr. Harris," Renee replied. "But I think we both know an apology alone isn't enough." "You're absolutely right," he said. "We've already begun reviewing our policies and are working with external consultants to implement comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training." Renee didn't let the polished response deter her. "Training is a good start," she said, "but it needs to be part of a larger culture shift. That means accountability, transparency, and a commitment to listening to your customers, especially those who've experienced discrimination." Daniel hesitated briefly before replying. "I couldn't agree more. What would you propose?" Renee outlined her ideas with clarity and conviction. The creation of a customer advisory board to provide ongoing feedback on inclusivity, an anonymous reporting system for employees and customers, and regular audits to measure progress. She drew from her years of advocacy work, ensuring her suggestions were both practical and impactful. By the end of the call, Daniel sounded genuinely impressed. "Miss Carter, your insights are invaluable. I'd like to invite you to join our advisory panel as we move forward. Your perspective would be a tremendous asset." Renee considered the offer, her heart pounding. This was an opportunity to drive real change, but it also carried a weight of responsibility. "I'll think about it," she said. "For now, my focus is on ensuring this specific incident is resolved appropriately." "Of course," Daniel said. "We'll be in touch with updates." That evening, Renee returned to her seat by the hotel window, the city glowing softly in the twilight. The day had been draining but productive. She felt the faint stirrings of hope, not just for herself, but for the others who might one day benefit from the ripples of her actions. As the first stars began to appear in the night sky, Renee closed her eyes and let the quiet settle around her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she was ready to face it. For now, that was enough. Horizon Skyways followed through on its promises, issuing a public statement reaffirming its commitment to inclusivity and respect for all customers. Sensitivity training was rolled out across all departments, and the company began an internal review of its hiring and promotion practices. The gate agent, Eric, was terminated following the investigation, sending a clear signal that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. But Renee wasn't interested in triumph over a single individual. Her focus had always been on the bigger picture, creating a system that valued every customer equally, regardless of their appearance or background. She accepted Daniel Harris's invitation to join the airline's advisory panel, becoming a driving force for meaningful change. Her work with Horizon Skyways extended far beyond policy recommendations. Renee facilitated discussions with employees at all levels, sharing her story and encouraging them to reflect on their own biases. She collaborated with other panel members to ensure the company's efforts were more than symbolic gestures. Her dedication inspired other organizations to take similar steps toward accountability and equity. In her personal life, Renee found herself transformed by the experience. While the sting of humiliation had been sharp, it reignited her passion for advocacy. She spoke about the incident at conferences and workshops, weaving it into her broader mission of dismantling systemic prejudice. Her nonprofit organization gained a surge of support, with many drawn to her unwavering resolve and determination to turn adversity into action. The incident became a chapter in her story, but it did not define her. Renee was far more than a moment of injustice. She was a woman of strength, vision, and grace who refused to accept the status quo. Months later, Renee returned to the same airport for a trip related to her nonprofit. As she walked through the terminal, she couldn't help but glance at the first-class counter. It had changed. There were new faces behind the desk, and the energy in the air felt different, warmer, more welcoming. The subtle shifts reflected the progress she had helped inspire. This time, her journey was seamless. The staff greeted her warmly, processed her ticket efficiently, and wished her a pleasant flight. As she boarded the plane, Renee felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not just for herself, but for the progress that had been made. When the plane ascended into the sky, she gazed out of the window, watching the world below shrink into a blur of lights and landscapes. Her journey had taught her a powerful lesson. Real change doesn't happen in a single moment. It takes countless steps, courage, and persistence. And even the smallest actions can create ripples far beyond what we can see. Closing her eyes, Renee allowed herself a faint smile. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead. After all, she had already proven that one voice, when used with purpose, could make all the difference. If Renee's story inspired you or made you think differently, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy stories like these, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Music fades out.